Hello, everybody. This is the Philosophy Society. It's September 6th, 2023. Achilles Justice is here with some friends. And so, yeah. So I've been spending a lot of time the last few weeks, months, talking about what it means to be philosophical. And I always kind of talk about the nature of the Philosophy Society and the benefits, or why are we here? I think the question, what am I doing and why am I here? You know, you can go down the path of rumination, which is not really good. It can lead to depression and stuff. But I think it's important to have an answer to those questions. Like, what are you doing? You know, what's going on right now? And some people may get anxiety from the lack of an answer and then just avoid it completely. But I feel that there is, to develop meaning within our actions, it is important to have a sense of these things. And you may not know the answer right away, and that's fine. But at least put that question in queue. This is something that is to be thought about. That way, going back with the coherence principle, that whatever I'm doing is in line with my identity and it's in line with my goals, right? Then you can make sense of, if you are doing something that entails a little bit of suffering, there's at least some meaning in that suffering. It's not just arbitrary, I'm just suffering for intrinsically, right? That's not going to lead to very much well-being. So, yeah. So the nature of the Philosophy Society. So philosophy, again, we define it as the love of wisdom. And then wisdom is like the quality of one's judgment, their experience, decisions, actions. And so when we talk about society, it's essentially just a group of people that share common values. There's some coherence. For it to be a group, it has to be coherent. There has to be some solidarity within that group. It can't just be a bunch of random particles, right? And the coherence is, relative to shared properties. So to just say that we're all a society because we're human, that's true. Maybe society is not the best term for this, but I'm going to lean on the side of marketing and branding. That's part of the reason why I'm doing it. You could say philosophy group. So the shared properties of this specific group would be the wisdom element, and every group is a composite of individuals. So individuals will make up the larger capacity of any group, right? And every specific individual would have to embody properties of wisdom, right? So there's one person, and then the group itself, right? So that's like the common factor here. The quality of our judgment, experience, decisions, and actions individually, there is going to be some responsibility. How do we do that, right? And one thing to say is that this organization in itself is in some sort of an infantile stage. It's like, I'm doing this like around an hour a week, but if it was fully developed, there would be training programs, things that would actually teach you how to do this stuff more directly. And so some people have communicated through feedback that they miss that I'm doing that it's been very theoretical recently. And a large part about developing a group of people that embody wisdom in practice is that practical element, right? And so what could we do? And so one thing is like our habits, right? That's a big thing that kind of is layered on every property of wisdom here. There's a habit of judgment. There's a habit of, you can say action. It seems kind of redundant. Within my experience, I may do certain things or have habits within that experience. And then I have a habit of decision making. So habits is a fruitful territory for the Philosophy Society to develop and apply wisdom within, right? That's kind of what we're going to be doing. And then our attitudes, that's another thing, which encompasses, there's an emotional component, and then like a part of our belief together, an attitude. And belief, that goes in the standard canonical trajectory of academic philosophy, is what is the nature of belief? What do we believe? How do we make sense of certain concepts, right, throughout over 2,000 years, right? And so we're going to get a lot of philosophical discussion on just this one notion of belief. The emotional side, though, that is largely, again, look at academic philosophy. There's a lot that's left out, which is where I'm trying to say that we need to turn around here and look at what we're doing, right? We go back to that perennial question. What am I doing? And then you could also follow up and say, does it make sense? Right? And so what is academic philosophy doing? And does it make sense? It makes sense for within a context. You say, well, what is this context? Well, so we have academic philosophy, right? And then the context is this thing called bureaucracy. The bureaucracy of the university. The university is largely the only place that philosophy really exists. There are some renegade, self-interested philosophers that will go to Indigo and then buy a book and peruse the book. But to devote your life and to pay money, to go into debt, to make it a profession and get paid, to subject yourself to the peer-reviewed process and the publication, either publish or die kind of lifestyle, that is what academic philosophy has become and is tied to. And so the nature of philosophy is largely contingent on that context in itself. And a large part, wisdom has shifted from other factors that are definitely relevant to wisdom and focused only on wisdom in the context of the bureaucracy of the university, which is how much publication production. And that has some value. Some doesn't have any value, but it's largely contingent on your job as a professor. That's it. Or maybe some quality of knowledge, like so does your job. And those two things are important. The job thing is just about money, So, like, if an individual had other modes of income, the context changes a little bit because they're not tied to the university in itself as the one like signing the check. Quality of knowledge is still important, but knowledge, belief, is only part of the context of wisdom or the spectrum of what it means to be wise. Knowledge is important. It's important to know things, to have an accuracy in what you believe and what you say. But how we live our lives, the quality of our life, our well-being is in some ways more fundamental. And so the Philosophy Society is supposed to be a group of people that embody properties of wisdom that enhance our well-being individually and together. And also look at factors, and we can still, respect elements with it that the university is producing. The university is giving us things and we can integrate that and we can understand it. Like a lot of it, again, goes, I've talked about this before, is reading. Reading comprehension. Clarity of writing. Okay, those are important. Sure, yeah, that's great. Why? Because there's so much obscure philosophy that it's so hard to understand. The response to that is we need to make sure all of our students don't write like that. So that if they do have some profound thought, everybody understands it, it's super clear. Sure, okay, I get that. That's wise within the context of reading and writing. However, when we go back to lifestyle, or mental health, that, it's fundamental to our existence, right? So what I've done is that I've defined, based on the words I'm using, what do I mean by philosophy society? It's not, it's not just a random decision to call this organization that. It's based on the notion of wisdom and well-being and a response to what we would call mental illness, right? And is there any way that humans can transcend beyond that? Is there something that we can do or have control over to significantly reduce the suffering that any person or group of people may exhibit? And so when we look at group wisdom, we have, and individuals, like we have a whole list of so we have problems to solve, which will enhance our wisdom. So one is our biases, things like prejudice, stereotyping, racism, violence. These are fundamental issues of our current society, which are embedded in our human psychology, right? And so the way to counterbalance these things is, and my thesis would be, is some organization that teaches people to be aware of it and then to practice skills that are contrary to it, right? So what would that be? So one is awareness. Two is like self-control. You talk about executive function. And there's other things that go along with that. Agency, responsibility. I haven't thought. Awareness, self-control. There are other things. This goes on. Oh yeah, critical thinking. And with awareness, that, like I've discussed these things before, self and the other, which includes the group, right? And that is necessary for any group, any emergent phenomena of individuals that becomes a group. Now there are a whole new other set of problems that can occur, right? And so, yeah. So this is the purpose of this. And so from a political perspective, it's supposed to enhance, in a democracy, enhance our autonomy. It's supposed to make the merit of your vote more meaningful because you're aware of not only yourself, other people, but the situation that we are all in, which we could call our environment. Yeah. How is it the case that we can survive as a democracy if individuals that behave like or are fascists, Hitler or Trump, can take over like one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful country in the world, right? Like we're at a position right now that is very similar to what happened with Hitler. It's super scary, and a wake-up call is needed. And so what is lacking is this really, is people's ability to have critical thinking, but critical thinking is not an isolated phenomena. Humans exist in a context. And so socialization is fundamentally important. Again, we have problems of cognitive capacity. Some people may not have the ability to be that reasonable. They have a low IQ. They're just born that way or whatever. Right? People don't like to talk about that. They're like, there's problems with this. Well, we can just do some tests then. We can just can you jump this high? Some people can, some people can't, right? And so those that don't have the capacity for reasoning in that way can rely on other social cues, like a sense of belonging. That's a healthy use of conformity, right? Conformity is good as long as it allows for criticism. Very fine. Yeah.
So, something that this reminds me of this whole topic of where the society is, and people like Trump are getting in power. It reminds me of a concept in physics which is called entropy. And basically what it is that the universe is going towards more disorder, and up to a maximum point where some theorize that then there would be a big collapse, which would be the opposite of the Big Bang. It's just some sort of a hypothesis. It's not proven. So it's like, well, okay, entropy is increasing on an overall scheme in the universe. Do we see that the entropy in society is also increasing, moving towards more disorder? And it ties in with what the gentleman said last time about, you were talking about helping someone quit smoking. And what he said was, look, you're presenting this as an uphill battle. Like, they need to put effort. So it reminded me as like sort of like entropy is like people, if they are attracted to entropy, is like they are attracted to more disorder because it's less effortful. So this topic that the natural tendency for universe is going towards more entropy, and we may see that in society as well, going more towards more disorder.
Good point. If I could connect to that on a literary level, the English writer D.H. Lawrence, one of the themes that he explores in his novels is that it seems that it is a natural part of the human condition to be attracted to disorder and chaos, even though we don't realize it. And we almost have to kind of train ourselves to implement a sort of order and order to the way we live. I wonder if that's probably part of our animalistic kind of encoding in our DNA, that we just naturally like stimulating environment, but it's not necessarily conducive to a civilized society.
Okay, so it's a good time to reveal one of my assumptions that is rooted behind this whole whiteboard here. So you brought the property and a list of ideas that are being brought up: entropy, disorder, and chaos. So fundamental is the idea of the cosmos, that there is order to the universe. We are part of the universe. There's order to us, and there's order to that which we experience. Everything that exists. Carl Sagan said, everything that ever was and ever will be is the cosmos, which is a time-based definition. Anything that's within time is ordered in some way. And our awareness of the order of things. Now, when I say order, what do you mean by that? I don't mean in a commanding way that some human being is saying, I order you to do this. It's more like that peg game, right? And then you have a ball and you drop the ball and the ball kind of makes its way through. There was even though it may appear to be chaotic, that is our perception. But there is a slight, say there's like a peg right below it. Every ball might have a little bit more mass on one side. There may be a rotation to it. It could actually be to that side a bit more, and then that's why it goes this way. So even though it appears we drop the ball from the same position every time, it's not always exactly the same. So when we say order, it really just means that things have a certain space or place within the existence that they take up. And I apply this cosmological approach towards the mind and mental health and my confidence or belief that I can help guide people through whatever it is they're going through, right? And like, some people, like when you get criticism, oh, you have a screw loose. That would be like saying that there's just a peg missing, like if someone has brain damage or something's going on with them, right? It's not that they don't have control. The mind is the thing that you're manipulating, the thing that it's like a video game controller. You're doing something. The agent or the consciousness is, whether it's automatic or not, it's still part of the mind. And so if there's something vacant, you're not really held responsible for that. It's not really your fault that you're blind, but you can have a walking stick to prevent to help aid you in that which you lack. And if my brain is lacking an organelle, or some of its organelles aren't as efficient because of the neurons or the connectivity, whatever's going on in there, right? I can rely on another person. That's why we're in a society. And so I really believe that, like you said, what do you think, Kelly? It's like, aside from just the stuff I talk about, I just feel that humans have kind of like got to a certain point and we've plateaued. We've developed technology, but it's, when we talk about like the Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals, and then the development of using tools like the anthropological analysis of humans, we've gotten to a point where like balancing out power and aggression and the relation between the individual and the group and our prefrontal cortex, there's just we're in this weird state right now where our technology is, that's what a big thing with the Cold War is, that we can destroy ourselves. When were we ever able to do that before? That's not a really big thing. Like the asteroid can come down, but we actually have an asteroid like at the push of a button, like an equivalence. So so it's really the relations between the people. It's like the individual development through evolution is one thing, but there's something to be said about the way that human society is structured, and that's, once I feel that we get to a point, there will be an emergence. Like you can take a bunch of building materials and just kind of like throw it in the corner and just wait around for something to happen. That's like the blind watchmaker thesis. It's like, not that I'm using this as an argument for God, I'm just saying like that's the argument, that how could humans or the universe just fit together so perfectly? There must be a creator. It couldn't have just happened on its own. Well, after billions and billions and billions and billions of years, the order of things, like a certain, like in biology, like look at like cells and the way that like DNA and like even like the COVID virus, like certain shapes at a micro organism level will fit together. And then there'll be a biochemical reaction that, like with proteins or whatever. I'm not a biologist, but there's an order to the way that those phenomena occur. And then other things happen, right? There's like inert elements that just don't do anything, right? But carbon fits with so many different things. It's the foundation for life. And so this is something that I believe is within our control. And why do I say that? Well, because of all of these things. And when we look at the history of philosophy or what psychology has discovered, and we talk about replication, these kind of things, why don't we just put all those things together and do it together and then see what happens, right? Then see if people like Trump can get that far. Then see if when we are legislating things, like if everybody is at that level, how can corruption really persist to that degree?
Could we go through the solution that you propose again? If we put everything together, what was the solution that you proposed?
So yeah, so what it is, the problems that we have in society are fundamentally based on our human psychology. There is a variance in human psychology, right? Like even just down to perception. Some people need glasses, some people don't, right? So what we do is we've created a technology to aid those that are visually impaired, right? We're all impaired because we're in, like, it goes back to the problem of when I talked about this stagnancy in evolution, that there is the contrast between the individual, the group, and our perception knowledge and the way we integrate together. Like the issue of like violence, for example, that somebody, like we all have an innate fear that somebody else could hurt us or kill us, right? Like hundreds of years ago, it was a real threat that if you said something that the church didn't agree with in Europe, you could be burned at the stake. It's a possibility still right now, but it's not like a real threat. Like if you go from this specific position, if I walked 300 meters and I said a specific phrase to a certain individual or group of individuals, the risk of me being murdered by them or assaulted would be like 90%, right? And so that in itself, the existence of that is a problem in society, right? Like just the fact that we have to have a criminal justice system that is retroactive instead of creating a society that's integrated in such a way that it's not that it's all crime would be prevented, you know, but we could proactively just know that if this person's upset, how can I respond to them? And then later on, they wouldn't, you know, be an asshole to somebody else or not drive safely or whatever else is going on, right? What I'm saying is that I believe there's a way for humans to integrate themselves in a social group, which I just gave it this name, right? That will counteract and counterbalance the limitations of the human condition that are actually the cause of like this emergence in our development, like the current solutions we have. So for example, like when like the Oppenheimer movie, all the top scientists were put together in a specific place to, you know, protect the country for the NATO alliance, or whatever you want to call it, like the Western way of life from, you know, the Axis Nazi/Russia kind of situation, right? And so that coordination after a certain amount of time led to them discovering something that you could argue saved the world from a longer period of war, right? And even protected the democratic way of life. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is, I think it's something like the coordination of scientists, social scientists, and all of them. So rather than creating science that is dispersed and sort of like it doesn't fit like it doesn't sort of come together, like try to be cooperative and coordinate among each other. I think that's something that that you're saying, and I can see it like being in the academia for a while. I can see that sort of a problem, the coordination problem, especially in the social sciences. So that's understandable. In terms of the plateau, if you could talk about, do you have a timeline that you think that plateau that you're proposing happened?
There's no way to predict anything about that. Like there's no.
Well, you said that there has been a plateau in the society that's
Yeah.
For how long approximately do you think that this plateau has been? Because that would help me understand your point better.
So it's like, okay, so we went from like pre-civilized stage, right? Like Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, and then there was like the hominin stage, right? And then we went to like the agriculture. There's agriculture. There's like the use of tools, agriculture, and then like I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist, but reading and like writing became a thing. Maybe the consolidation of language before that, right? And then living in cities. Like there's these benchmarks of human development anthropologically. But then we haven't gotten past certain things like war, right? Which is like the most extreme. That's the most like there's that, or be like being captured by like a serial killer and tortured in their basement. Like these are the fact that those are still possibilities, you know. But from our current evolutionary stage, like we are almost, you know, we're equipped with the capacity to understand language. It's part of our DNA now. Like at least Chomsky believes so, right? For humans to get to the next level is for us to I believe is for us to integrate the individual with the group in a different way, right? And that requires some training so that we can remove our things like bias and prejudice and stereotyping and racism and violence as extreme examples. And the way we do that is through increasing our self-awareness, increasing our ability to be mindful of our habits and be in control of what our behavior is, right? Implementing critical thinking and evaluation of our beliefs, which is the canonical view of philosophy, but not limited to just this publication thing, reading and writing and comprehension stuff, right? Like philosophy was an oral practice back in the day. It was something that you did. You spoke to people, right? And you talked about stuff. And so that's something that's fundamentally missing in the university. If there's a lecturer that tells you what you need to know, and if you do not regurgitate accurately what that individual, the evaluator, has said, you are graded poorly, which is important for comprehension again, right? Okay, it is important to comprehend things, but being philosophical is not limited to that alone. And so this same notion of being wise in a social context, I believe, is the solution to the problems of today. And maybe, maybe I'm too late because AI will just solve it all for us anyways. I don't know. But if there's a problem with AI, then we have to figure it out again, right? So we can't rely on the God of AI. It's not, it can help us, but it's a tool, or at least an external entity. It's not us. It's not my consciousness. And then you say, well, what if AI integrates with us and our consciousness? Well, I'm not really sure what to say about that. Like, that's an empirical question. If you have an implant and the AI is in the implant, will we just become a hive mind? And do you have an identity at that point? Don't know, right? Again, that's something that I think we'd have to test. So at least for now, this appears to be the only solution, excluding certain forms of technology that don't exist yet. However, this might just be completely outdated and archaic and very analog, like you have to learn things and do things, whereas some form of like super intelligent artificial intelligence kind of thing would just do it all for us. Maybe that's what's going to happen. I'm not sure, but I'm not really going to wait around for that to happen or rely on it. I would rather my argument against that is I want us to be self-reliant and have a self-sustaining kind of approach towards our own problems, and I believe this is something that can work. And the only thing is that people have to do it. The biggest problem is just, will people even do the thing? And so my solution to that is that it has to be a socialized way of being. It's that within a social group, you get like points or acknowledgement or acceptance within that group for acting in a specific way. So we see in group therapy, this is something that works, right? And in the paper that I presented like 3 months ago, in 3 fundamental categories: addictions, psychosis, and personality disorders, the group context was better than individual forms of therapy or therapy without the group community context. So, I think there's empirical evidence that this will work. I think that from an inductive perspective, there's a really good chance it'll work. So we might as well just try. Because even if it doesn't have this plateau effect to some degree, it will have other effects, right? Like the reduction of mental illness, and that's a good thing. That's great. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to increase your well-being as it is anyways. And it will help with our political situation, wherever that might be in a democracy. So I just, And so if this is what it is, then the next thing would be, well, what are we going to spend our time doing? And part of it is like, it would be based on the individual's present, so let's say there are 3 people, and there would be step 1 would be some evaluation of the individual. So this becomes kind of psychological at a certain point, right? And so I'll just use myself, like I might have certain habits that are not very good for myself or others. And so how can so we'll start with the first one, is just habits. Like sometimes when the dogs bark, I get frustrated and I yell at the dog, and it disrupts people in the house. There's an example. And when the dog barks, so now I'm going to understand, well, why do I do this? Right? If I know the consequence is bad, so we have habit 1, and then the consequence is like not good. So I want to understand what the habit is. So I already know that there's a negative consequence to the habit, so we know it's bad. So it has to be removed or replaced, or there's learning to be had here. I'm breaking down exactly what the mechanics of this really means at like the most basic fundamental level. And really it's just, it goes back to like psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, really, that's all it really is. But it's just done within a context where people are accepting and open to it, right? And so I just use myself as an example, And so the first thing, we go back to self-awareness. Why does this exist? And if an individual's cognitive capacity is limited and they don't have that self-awareness, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, not optimally in an optimal state, or it's been damaged, whatever the situation is, then it would just be the reliance on other people, right? And so for that to happen, there needs to be a relationship where there's trust, right? And the person feels safe to accept whatever information they have. Now, again, one of the main criticisms here is, well, what about things like narcissism? And there's an alternative approach, which is my response to that is the socialization context, that even if you have this personality disorder and you lack the ability to have accurate self-awareness, because it makes you feel your self-esteem gets reduced, or it's just a habit of processing information in the world, which could be a function of the way your brain just works. Your brain just doesn't work that way, right? This is going to be an empirical thing. I don't have the research to back up this area. That's still why I'm doing some research on these things. But I hypothesize that I have done it in practice with my housing program. And I have seen like the narcissist, we don't want to get into the example of narcissism again, but I believe that there's a way to solve that problem, And so anyways, we look at habit 1 and I observe it. And so with this dog barking example, when the dog barks, I feel like tension in my chest, and then I have an automatic response to like yell back, right? To like exert dominance in the dog, thinking the dog will not bark. But it doesn't actually work. It works a little bit, but it's not that effective actually when you look at it, And all it really does is just something to wake people up, right? There's the dog barking, now Achilles is barking, everyone's barking, And so one method would be we can try to find a different way to reduce dog barking. And then the other thing would be my response to dog barking, right? And so what we've done is we've looked at the cause. So there's the person, and then there's like an internal thing going on with this person. There's the cause of that, which is the environment. So we can deal with the environment, we can try to deal with the internal cause, and then there's the response to that internal cause. And then we can try to learn an alternative response, a response 1 and response 2, right? So we want to have the non-Achilles just modeling the same behavior that the dog is, but in human form, right? And so the acceptance of this process is really what the Philosophy Society would be. That's part of it, right? There would be, every individual would be in an ongoing process of like upgrading or self-renewal or self-development, like you're growing really. And so it's the most optimal way to grow, but it has to be done within a certain there's a certain method, there's a way to do it. That way you're not just like criticizing people because they've done something that pisses you off or makes you upset, and now it's a harmful thing. That's not the intention here, right? Because this thing could be perceived as bullying in some ways, right? That you're just saying stuff to somebody else because you're trying to hurt them or something like that, right? And that's not what we're doing. And so, yeah. And so really the main step is to like get people to so I don't know, like there's different ways to do this. Like you can do it directly, which I've done before, and you can do it indirectly. Indirectly would be like when things occur in your life, then we have a certain way to discuss it, right? So, and usually what you'll see is that that kind of a thing will happen when you're friends with somebody, right? Because you feel safe with them, you have a certain rapport and a way of communicating things. And so it may be too artificial to be overly direct about it, right? Like some people might be able to do that, but not everybody will be at that level where they're comfortable with like that much focused criticism, you know? And so I think that just that in itself will create a kind of hierarchy of based on comfortability with this, like with something like the evaluation step, right? And so once you do like an evaluation of each person, then there's how the other members interact with that individual. And then this individual's ability to grow and modify their habits, their attitudes, their beliefs, their emotional intelligence, and then through the mechanisms of awareness, self-control, critical thinking, right? And then once you do this method for each person, then the group in itself starts to grow up, because we go back to the group is a composite of the individuals, right? And so that's just something that happens all over the place. Now, the issue is that when some individuals are not able to go through this process. And so why is that the case? And I think there are psychological reasons why. And so what we really need to do, when we said there's problems to solve, but then there's like limitations on the method. And so there needs to be a counterbalance to those specific limitations. And with the counterbalance to the variety of psychological orientations, and look at the time, and when you develop the skills to be sensitive to that, then I think then this can occur. Because otherwise it might only work for certain people, and that doesn't work. It needs to be applicable to like everybody. That's really what it is. And so in this context, what we can do is we can talk about like different kinds of habits. We can do like meditation practice. We can go through critical thinking practice, right? Like what can we do together? And then really like this process, I would reserve as an indirect effect of, members of the Philosophy Society. They'll just do it on their own. So you guys would just do this for each other. If you guys hang out on your own time after you've developed like a friendship, the goal is that you would have the skill set to go through this methodology to help each other grow as people and then be aware of yourself. Because the feedback part is just to increase the awareness of the self, right? So yeah, that's a rundown of exactly how it works. Which is the same thing as just if you went to go for therapy, but it's just in a different context, right? It's just as things occur in your life, which is like retroactive in some ways, but then there's like the proactive approach where you're just like, okay, tell me how I can become better. Okay, we're good? That's a good, I can leave it at that point. That's good. Any comments before we close it?
No, I think that was beautifully put together.
Okay, thanks.
I support the whole mission.
Thank you.